Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Vicarage here at Penn. Hope this finds you well and cheerful today. I don't know about you, I'm really looking forward to this weekend. We have services in church, 5:30 Saturday evening, 8 o'clock Sunday morning, and 10 o'clock at Sunday morning at St Bart's, and of course 11:45 at St Anne's as well, and you be very, very welcome. As an added inducement, I'm delighted to say that they are slightly relaxing the rules on singing. And although congregational singing still can't happen, so we had to listen to the hymns, although the organists are rather good, aren't they? I'm delighted to say that Carly's going to sing for us on Sunday morning for an anthem, and we're looking at getting our choirs back, hopefully, God willing, as soon as a week on Saturday, Sunday. So hopefully looking forward to that. Keep us in your prayers. Of course, if you enjoy singing, we'd love to have you in our choir. So if that's so, you know someone that you think could sing and be good, just get in touch. We'd love to hear from you on that one. But anyway, church is open this weekend, and we'd love to see you at St Bart's. So to our reading for this morning. To understand this morning's reading, I've got to give you a reasonable preamble on the all-important context. We're talking about the early church, okay? And I think the thing we have to remember about the early church is it came from Judaism. Jesus was a Jew, the disciples were Jews, and after Jesus was resurrected, all the new believers were Jewish too. You have Jewish people in Jerusalem discovering Jesus. You have people in the area, Judean Jews finding Jesus. You've got Jews in Samaria in the north discovering Jesus. You've got Jews in Damascus in Syria and in the east discovering Jesus. You've got the Ethiopian eunuch taking it down. But what you want to see is, so far, they've all been Jewish, which means that all the people who discovered Jesus up to this point have been, as I say, Jewish back, which means that, some more than others, I imagine, they wouldn't eat pork, they'd have the same Bible, they'd circumcise the little boys on the 8th day, whatever it was, and so they all had these things in common. But the point is, to this point, everybody who met Jesus, just to discover Jesus and followed the way, as they called it, was Jewish up to this point. The question inevitably came, as the Jesus movement grew, would people who weren't Jewish also be able to join in as well? And I guess it's kind of important, isn't it? Because it includes probably most of us. Would people who weren't Jewish be able to join the movement too? And it's a big thing, actually. And I think to try and get your head around it, you've got to kind of see what a big thing it is. Because if other people could join as well, that means they wouldn't have the same Bible. They wouldn't have the same Old Testament. They wouldn't circumcise the little boys. They might even eat pork, horror of horrors, this type of stuff. So what would happen if these new people joined? And with that in mind, we are picking it up now at Acts and chapter 10. In Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of the Italian cohort, as it was called. He was a devout man who feared God with all his household. He gave alms generously to the people and prayed constantly to God. One afternoon, at about 3 o'clock, he had a vision in which he clearly saw an angel of God coming in and saying to him, "Cornelius." He stared at him in terror and said, "What is it, Lord?" He answered, "Your prayers and your alms have ascended as a memorial before God. Now send men to Joppa for a certain Simon who's called Peter. He's lodging with Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the seaside." When the angel who spoke to him had left, he called 2 of his slaves and a devout soldier from the ranks of those who served him, and after telling them everything, he sent them to Joppa. About noon the next day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up onto the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while it was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw the heaven opened and saw something like a large sheet coming down, being lowered to the ground by its 4 corners. In it were all kinds of 4-footed creatures and reptiles and birds of the air. Then he heard a voice saying, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." But he said, "By no means, Lord, for I've never eaten anything that's profane or unclean." The voice said to him again a second time, "What God has made clean, you must not call profane." This happened 3 times, and the thing was suddenly taken up into heaven. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So how was Peter convinced then that non-Jewish people can join the Jesus movement too. Well, I love this. Peter's a typical bloke. He's hungry one day and he's waiting for his tea, well, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, whatever he was going to have. And he was hungry, and whilst that, he had a dream, and he had a dream about food. He was a typical bloke. He's hungry, so he dreams about food. I think that's really, really funny. Anyway, in this dream, he sees this bizarre sheet coming down with all these animals on it, and these unclean animals, things like pigs, all things that you're not allowed to eat. And in the vision, he's told, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." And of course, being a good Jewish boy, Peter says, I've never eaten pork, I've never eaten any of these things. And the response comes back, what God has called clean, you must not call unclean. In other words, if God says you can do it, you can do it. And actually, in terms of can non-Jewish people find Jesus, what he's basically saying is, if God's letting it happen, if they're finding God, who are you to stand in the way of that? What God has called clean, who are you calling unclean? And so if God helps people who are non-Jewish to find Jesus, who are the church to say otherwise? And I think that's a real, and Peter gets this. And then just to kind of reinforce the message, at the same time, this man Cornelius, this non-Jewish but good and godly Roman soldier, has another vision from 30 miles away in which he sends people to go and get Peter, who's staying at the house of a tanner, which I might say was an unclean profession. Peter was a good Jewish people, shouldn't have been staying there probably, because tanning was an unclean occupation. So of all the unlikely things, he's sent to go and find this man Peter. So Peter has this vision, and he must be thinking, this is mind-blowing. All of a sudden these new people can join, and yes, I can eat pork and this type of stuff. And all of a sudden, at the same time, Cornelius' people arrive as well. And that is how Peter is convinced that non-Jewish people can discover the Christian faith. And I suppose from our point of view, we want to say, thank God for that. Because as I said, most of us don't come from a Jewish background. And I'm very, very glad. I say thank God for that. Because without this vision, without this, we wouldn't have been able to become Christians ourselves. And I'm really glad, because I love being with Jesus. So that's the first thing. But I think the other thing to say is this. It must have been strange for them to receive into their ranks people who weren't like them. People who, maybe they did eat pork. Maybe they didn't have the same biblical background. Maybe they didn't circumcise their boys. People who were different. And they had to welcome them in and accommodate them. With all the ramifications it would have had for the other people who worshipped in the temple, for what would Granny have thought, and all this type of stuff. And I suppose the message for us is they had to accept non-Jewish people, and as a result of that, we can become Christians today. Who might we need to welcome into our Christian communities today? Who are the people who aren't necessarily like us that we need to welcome into God's family today? Because what God has called clean, who are we to declare unclean?